Hi everyone. Thank you so much, Ben. Yeah, I'm Lydia, and as Ben said, I work for Exeter Diocese, so cover the whole of Devon, but I'm based next to the beautiful cathedral in the centre of Exeter, which is so nice. So yeah, I do this role as part of the mission and ministry department, and I work 4 days a week. So what I do is I oversee the net zero side of our work. So I'm sure that comes into Ben's updates and work in Cornwall, but we're working on that in Devon as well. So audits, energy footprint toolkit, data collection, all of that I work on, and also biodiversity. So that's our Living Churchyards programme, and yeah, surveys and all the stuff you guys are doing. So it's great to hear that, yeah, there's lots of momentum in Cornwall as well as Devon. And I also then oversee a sort of the outreach side of basically just what this is why do people care? Why should Christians be involved in environmental work? What's the theology around it? How does climate change fit in with faith, and vice versa? So yeah, and then I also oversee social justice, so it's quite a big remit. But I went to COP27. I'll share my slides in a second, which was such a privilege. So that was hosted in November last year in Sharm el-Sheikh, which is the southern peninsula of Egypt, near the Red Sea, which was amazing. So yeah, I just thought I'd share sort of what it was actually like there, because I think so many people have asked me oh, how was Egypt? I said, well, it was lots of things. So I was just going to run through what I got up to there, who I went with, what I was doing, and yeah, then afterwards I was thinking we could finish with some time of reflection and prayer, and yeah, just sort of bringing it all together. So does anyone have any questions or thoughts at this point? So as soon as I start sharing my screen, I can only see about 3 of you. So it will have questions now and at the end, but does anyone have any initial questions or thoughts? Okay, no, great. Well, I'll share my screen, and then yeah, we can have more questions at the end. So I hope, does this work? Can everyone see this? Let me go for
I can certainly see it.
Okay, great. Thanks. Ben, if anything goes wrong, you're one of my little people in the corner, so please just wave at me. It's suddenly not happening. Great. So yeah, just diving straight into it. This was me outside the big banner at the front of the conference centre. And I went with this amazing team of people as part of the Christian Climate Observers programme. So this was a group of people literally from all around the world, and so many different denominations and faith backgrounds and work backgrounds, mainly young people, which was really encouraging, because sometimes I can feel it's quite isolated work. And this programme is funded by A Rocha and YWAM and the Lausanne Creation Care Network, if you've heard of those names. So just lots of Christian charities wanting to empower people to actually go to COP, to then feed back what it was what's happening to Christian communities around the world. So yeah, it was totally privileged to go. I still can't really believe I've been with such an amazing group. So yeah, that's just a bit of context about who I was there with. And I was there for the second week of the conference. So it runs over 2 weeks, and the second week is more focused on sort of technical details and policy agreements and the nitty-gritty side of it. Whereas I think week 1 is traditionally more networking. It's all great and fun, and yeah, lots more media stuff happens that week. So no, I loved week 2, but I was just there for 1 week out of both. This was the week 2 team. Not going to go through everyone, but just so you can sort of see who I was with. Yeah, they're all very dear to me and very inspirational people. So that was great. So I just thought I'd sort of go through a bit of a day in the life because there was so much on each day. I thought it would be easier to run through in order of what I might have done, just to share my experiences that way. So we got a bus, which was packed, but the best conversations of the day always happened on the bus because everyone was sort of not in like work mode, and actually those conversations were so precious, and you just sat next to random people. It was great. Whereas in the conference center it was quite formal, quite, you know, if you know people, you know people, if you don't, you don't. Whereas the bus felt a lot more like a level playing field for some conversations. So as soon as you got up, you were straight into the whole climate change action conversation, which is quite intense, but it was great. And this was the landscape that this was based in. So yeah, I love this picture because it was really just like that, just sort of sandy, deserty nothingness, and then huge mountains, which that's actually the Sinai Peninsula, and then just sort of rows of like palm trees and then like random shops. I've just never been anywhere like that before, so I thought it was an interesting place to have a conference center. It wasn't massively well resourced for the 40,000 people that were there, but yeah, that's just about where it was. So yeah, this was just the conference center, and in the mornings we would sort of go around. There was a busy schedule for every day, but you could just pick what you wanted to go to. So I was there as an observer, which it literally is what it says on the tin. I was there to observe and feedback the conversations that I heard, the people that I met, the work that was happening. And yeah, I didn't really have any ulterior motive apart from observing. And I suppose from a Christian perspective, praying, interceding, and like, you know, bringing Jesus and faith into the conversations and interactions that I had with people there. But again, some conversations were very evangelistic and very about faith and why I'm here and my job for the Church of England, and others just really weren't. And I just hope they still, yeah, sort of saw a glimpse of Jesus through me, even if I didn't say that specifically. So there were loads of different events, and they basically were set out like this. We had amazing panelists, and it was just great to hear what organizations were doing, what governments were doing. I mean, just rooms like this are so inspirational. So that's sort of how we would start the day off. And just to say, these people are often like not the key decision makers. So the key party members and decision makers had like a different color code on their badge, which basically meant they had access to like the negotiating rooms. So we weren't allowed into that as an observer because that's classified and confidential. So these people that we were speaking to were still the leaders in their field, but weren't like on the political end of things. Yeah, so just to make that distinction. And then we would just go around. There was loads of stalls. Honestly, it was really overwhelming. I'm an extrovert and I love people and ideas and like bright, colorful things and like artwork. And I was so overwhelmed. So yeah, just to give you a bit of an idea of like what it was like. Anyway, one of my favorite stalls was this, which was all about Arctic sea ice and how basically they had lots of these sort of like cylindrical, is that a word? Like cylinder posts in like a triangle shape. And this one on the left was stood up, but because we're on track for at least 1.2 degrees of warming, they'd like put it on its side to say this is what we've lost already, because essentially this ice and like a fraction of their exhibition, like a fraction of the ice in the Arctic has already gone, it's already been damaged, it already doesn't support wildlife anymore. So that was on its side, which was such a simple thing, but just so powerful that actually a reminder that climate change is serious and it's happening, and it's happened essentially in lots of cases and environments. And I think that really just got me. I don't know, it might not get you, but it just really got me, because I was like, oh, this has collapsed, it has fallen down, this ecosystem's not working for people or animals, and that's just awful. So that really impacted me. But it was great to learn about the science of different temperature thresholds, so that if we keep increasing global temperatures up to like 2 degrees and then 2.5 degrees and 3 degrees and 4.2 degrees, what would happen to Arctic environments? So yeah, it was very educational, and there were lots of stands like this that were very detailed with science and graphs and numbers and data. Yeah, which was really interesting. But yeah, just a reminder that climate change is so damaging and it's so heartbreaking, and I think it's very easy to sort of swan around a conference centre like that and forget that this ice has melted, that people are having to move homes, like that people can't feed themselves, that animals like are dying. So yeah, that was quite heavy stuff, but really important. And again, one of my favourite presentations that I went to was actually hosted by the Met Office, which was funny because they're based here, so seeing them in Sharm el Sheikh was a bit weird. But yeah, like, what questions can science answer and what do users need? And this was all about policy intervention for early warning systems for flooding. But I think it's such a great question that is so relevant to the church. Like, what questions can science answer? Because science has a lot of answers and is a great way to answer questions. But what do users need? What do Christians need? What do people of faith need? What do communities here need? I don't have the answers to that, but it's a good question that's relevant to lots of spheres. So yeah, it was all very thought-provoking. Again, the Sustainable Development Goals, don't know if you've heard of these, but these are set out by the UN. And it's basically, I think 17 goals that they want organizations and companies and I suppose everyone to aim for by, I think, 2050. So one, just looking on there, 16, which is like the dark blue one, is like peace, justice, and strong communities, or like clean water and sanitation, you know, like food access, all very basic, essential goals. And yeah, when I was taking a photo of it, this woman came up with her other goal, which was access to culture, which I wanted to take a photo of and share because I thought it was really interesting that actually so many of these goals are about basic necessities and food and water and peace and security. And obviously that's great, but a lot of these do ignore cultural differences or languages or history or indigenous knowledge. And I think that was a theme that sort of came up throughout COP. It was like, oh, it sounds great, a great solution for everyone. I was like, well, is it actually great? Where does culture come into that? Where does history come into that? Are we aiming to like respect cultures as much as we're aiming for clean water? Is that part of the same conversation? Is it not? So I yeah, again, I don't really have concise thoughts or answers on that, but I thought that was really fascinating. Yep, so then this is all a typical morning. So you can tell it was exhausting. But I met the leader of the Pacific Youth Forum. I took a selfie with him at the top, and he was leading this talk all about the impact of sea level rise in the Pacific Islands on people with disabilities and additional needs. And as you can see on the screens, this woman was doing sign language for all the talks. The other main speaker was a woman who was blind and had like 2 carers to sort of like guide her around the conference centre. And honestly, it was the most fascinating talk, because I personally hadn't thought about, like, if you had a physical or mental disability, how would you actually escape rising sea levels? How would you be cared for? How would you be part of your community if you're physically cut off from an evacuation road that you can only walk through if, you know, you're very like able-bodied, or like in a refugee center, if you had to move house and be evicted because of sea level rise? Like, that's all often based around able-bodied people who are able to socialize, able to communicate, and able to like move themselves around. And I just not thought of the implications of like practical climate change impacts on the most vulnerable. I think we often talk about you know, climate impacts making marginalized groups and vulnerable people even more vulnerable, but often we just break that down into like financially poor people or people in poverty in a very material way. And actually there are lots of differences in experience and capabilities, and that's really, really important to bring into climate action and climate conversations. And I was the only non-Pacific person in that room, which I thought again was really interesting, that yeah, lots of those people probably know that already and they're there listening and supporting that talk, but actually people in the West need to know that, or able-bodied people need to know that, or, you know, like, yeah. So anyway, I thought that was really fascinating and important. So there's a variety of talks all the time, and there was lots of conversations and ideas just buzzing around, which I loved. But one of my favorite ideas, or like impacts, is the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. So this is David. He was one of the founders of this campaign, which is basically to end fossil fuels in a safe and fair way. So this is a treaty that anyone can sign, individuals can sign, churches can sign, governments have signed, and organizations like the World Health Organization, basically to say no new expansion of fossil fuel sites or developments, like a just transition away from that in the energy market, and a fair transition for workers who work in the fossil fuel industry, which is great. So I'm really hoping and praying this gets more traction at a government level, because actually that's ultimately what we need, and that is the main cause of the climate crisis. So we need to explicitly name the elephant in the room that is fossil fuels. And yeah, I just think this campaign's amazing. So I can give you more information about that if you want. But yeah, again, there were lots of sort of creative ways to engage with this, which I think I really wanted to feed back to my churches and communities that I work with here in Devon, that actually so often in climate change, people are like, oh, climate change, or like roll their eyes at it, or, you know, it can be a bit of a chore or a bit tedious for some people. But actually visualities and like optics of climate change are so important, and color and nice ways of presenting things and making things look fun and interactive is really a great way to actually engage people with what the problem actually is and their role to change that. You know, I just was really inspired by all the creative ideas at COP, and I would love to see more of that here. I need to bring that into my work more, but yeah, they were just a few examples of things that I really loved. And again, a massive mural, and the main girl on the front, not me in person, the girl on the mural in the center is Vanessa Nakate. And I don't know if you've heard of her, but she's a climate activist from Uganda, and she's a Christian, and she was on the front of this mural, and I was like, yes, this is so evangelistic. This is, if anyone looks at Vanessa's interviews that she's done, or social media or outreach, she's just so explicit about the gospel. Like, this is all about the gospel. This is why she's doing what she's doing. This is Jesus, and her faith is like the motivation for all her work. So I was just so inspired to see her as like the main poster girl for this mural. Yeah, so it's just really encouraging to see that Christians and young Christians are really passionate and involved in this area, and that actually it's such a mission opportunity. Like, I can't emphasize how much of an open door climate change is to talk about Jesus and creation as worship to him. So yeah, I thought that was a really inspiring art piece as well. And this was me with Vanessa afterwards, and I actually did an interview with her on my social media after COP, just to talk about those links between faith and theology and climate change, and her story, her testimony. It was amazing. So yeah, I had a photo with her, but around us, we had like our little Christian climate observers group, and we all prayed for and with Vanessa, which was just so incredible. I was just in tears. It was so beautiful. And to be honest, the whole COP centre did feel a bit like a spiritual wasteland. And for the first few days, I really struggled with that. I think spiritually, the atmosphere was just so competitive and so arrogant. Like, we have the solutions. Well, really, this is a moral crisis. And really, the answer to that is ultimately Jesus. So yes, net zero work is really important, but technology isn't really the problem, so it's not really the full solution. So I felt quite passionate and yeah, motivated to be like, actually, this is so a part of my faith, and that's an amazing opportunity. Yeah, and again, lots of marches, and yeah, just really, there was a lot of energy, as you can tell. I'm quite excited even reliving it. There's just loads of people being like, yeah, this is what we actually want. This is the change we want to see, which is really inspiring. And there are also a few bishops there. So from a Church of England perspective, I was like, oh, I have to go and say hi. So on the left, this is the Bishop of Stockholm in Sweden. And on the right, this is the Bishop of Panama. And I just loved that they were wearing their purple shirts and dog collars at COP. Like, that's very bold, and really that was such a witness. And I had a great chat with them about what they're doing in their areas. And yeah, it was really encouraging to be like, okay, the church and the Church of England and people of faith are a part of this conversation, and I'm not the only Anglican here. Really. Anyway, so sorry, I know this is all a lot of information, but at lunchtime, annoyingly, there's no recycling. Like, even the basics of running a conference, like, just weren't there. So I don't know if you heard, but Coca-Cola were one of the main sponsors for the event. And because, as in my earlier picture, it was basically in a desert, they had to import water to the conference center every day. So there's like big water fountains that once you'd use that bottle, they would just replace it. But by about like 2 o'clock every day, the whole conference center ran out of water because it was just so hot. So then Coca-Cola gave out their products for free. So in the afternoon, we would often have like a Coke or a Fanta or a Sprite just to like pick you up, because it was pretty tiring. And then there was no glass recycling. Just simple things like that were really just made me think, like, what is really going on here? This is just such a talking shop. And why are Coca-Cola, one of the biggest polluters, sponsoring this event that claims to care for the environment? And where is this waste going? Ultimately, it's probably going to end up in our sea, which on the inside of that conference center, you're talking about protecting. It just doesn't add up. So I know that frustrated me. So after lunch, or our little 3 p.m. Coca-Cola, we would have more meetings and just really attend whatever was happening. And this was a really interesting talk about the UK government and what the UK is doing or not doing around climate change. And we got to speak with this guy on the right. He was part of like the youth parliament and part of like the UK delegation. So it was great to actually have real conversations with people. And I think with the other observers, there was loads of sort of integration, but I think there was a big gap between like the delegates who are making those decisions about loss and damage, about climate finance, about, you know, water and sanitation, and between observers like me who were hearing all these great stories, but actually I don't think the decision makers heard those stories, which I think that's a shame. So again, I went to this talk by like the water pavilion, which was made up by all these partners that you can see behind this guy talking. And I was just sat there and I think I was just like, wait, what? Like, what is happening here? So he was talking about great projects in water sanitation and how climate change undoes those aid efforts. For example, building a well. When climate change changes the water table, that well now doesn't reach water because it's retreated to a further level. So how do you build new wells? Is that a sustainable solution? Do the community actually use it? All those questions. And he was saying all this stuff. I can't remember his specific role or organization, but I Googled how many people in the world like don't have access to safe water. And 1 in 3 people around the world don't have access to safe water. And it's 2023, and we've been doing this work for decades. And all these partners, as you can see, have millions, if not billions, between them. And yes, I'm sure they do great work. I'm not here to like sabotage that. But really, what is going on? We have enough money and we have enough people and we have enough skills to really make sustainable change, and yet 1/3 of people don't have access to safe water, which is a basic human right and human necessity. It was insane and just so sad that actually, are these systems really helping the most vulnerable? Like, I don't really think or know if they are. And again, we met with Jessie Young, who is like the lieutenant for John Kerry, who is the American climate portfolio government person. He's probably a lot more than that. So yeah. But Jessie Young spoke with our group, which was great. And it was really, really cool to meet him. But I think towards the end of the week, I was just getting so much more skeptical of all of this talk and all of this networking and presentations and ideas. I was just like, what's really happening? People are still really suffering and people are just pointing fingers. People are not saying sorry. People are not changing their ways. And like, this is the biggest tragedy, as well as the actual impacts of the climate crisis. So I, asked Jessie Young a few questions, which I felt, he wasn't really expecting. But I sort of just grilled him on like America's role in all of this and in these negotiations. And maybe it was how I phrased it, I don't know, but he just totally deferred everything to someone else. It was China's fault. Oh, Saudi Arabia. Oh, if you really want to make a difference, speak to your MP. I was like, well, you're sort of the accumulation of lots of MP equivalents in America, and you're just pointing the finger to someone else when you have so much influence and authority. And I've not done much follow-up with Jessie or like looking at his portfolio of work. Like, he was a really nice and great guy, and I'm not saying he's the problem. But I just thought, actually, if everyone everywhere is pointing the finger so easily, that's not great, and that doesn't actually lead to any solutions. And is it really just China's fault when America and the UK just export their emission calculations to the developing world? Like, that's not just China, that's all interconnected. So I think, yeah, again, it was such a privilege to even sit next to him on a sofa, but also just so sad that, like, actually, yeah, it's so easy to point the finger and blame someone else first. And I saw that at like lots of levels of, yeah, different people at COP. Anyway, sorry, this is quite a long update, but slightly coming towards the end, going into land. This was, well, literally land grabs. This was one of my most favorite signs that I saw. Nature-based solutions equals land grabs. And that really got me thinking, because lots of companies now are saying nature-based solutions are the way forward. And, you know, we're working with nature, we're planting these trees, we're, you know, getting people out in nature. And actually, at whose expense? Nature-based solutions sound great, but if there's no critical observation of what that actually means, then I don't think that is good. And this was a sign that was part of like an Indigenous march at COP. And I just thought, oh, we can't be blindly endorsing things that sound great when really they might be land grabs. And I'm not saying every nature-based solution is a land grab, but really, who is it a solution for? So I really had a lot of critical and quite skeptical thoughts, because yeah, it sounds great. If you believe what companies and governments say at face value, like, there's not really a massive problem, there's not really a massive climate crisis, and like, we don't really need all this work. And that is just so far removed from millions of people's realities, and that's not okay. And I think Christians really have a lot more potential to sort of step into that gap and be like, okay, hang on a sec, I'm not belittling you and I'm not criticizing you, but I am asking a critically thought through question of what you're actually doing. Loss and damage is a great example. What does that actually mean? Whose terms is that decided on? Who does that actually benefit? Where's the money being pulled from? Who's in charge of that? I think they're really, really important questions that I don't have the answers to, and no one person does. But I think one of my main takeaways from COP was to not take things at face value, yeah, which can be hard in the climate change conversation, which can be very misleading anyway. And yeah, we saw these Indigenous people from the Amazon who had just come out of a meeting with President Lula, I think, which was amazing. It was just so surreal to see. I mean, their beautiful headdresses and like Indigenous outfits were just stunning and beautiful. And we asked the woman on the left in the sort of like long beige coat and red dress, you know, just like what the meeting was about, like how did it go? And she did not speak any English. She just totally was like, no. And that was so humbling for me and my friend, because I think we also often think that the whole world speaks English and the whole world's Western and the whole world, you know, can relate to me and my little life. And that's just not true. And the fact that she was not interested in someone who doesn't make any effort to speak her language, doesn't know anything about her, would just come up to her and start saying something in English. That really convicted me, just to think that, like, actually I'm not entitled to all this knowledge and all this these conversations. And I'm so privileged to speak English when most of the world does, but I don't speak any other languages, and I don't really have any understanding of other cultures. So her sort of dismissal of me was very humbling. But I think that's one of the things that I loved about COP. There literally people from all over the world, which I never otherwise would have met. And it was a really inspirational space to be in. But yeah, anyway, maybe just to finish, because I'm aware of time, this was one of the posters that I saw at one of the stands, and basically just said, the last fish eaten and the last stream poisoned, you'll realize that you can't eat money. The future is one where we put people first. And yes, I agree. But putting people first is something that Christians are called to, and something that the Bible emphasizes. This is the classic example of love your neighbor. So I just was reminded that actually a spiritual dimension to all of these conversations is so needed and so important, because we know that we can't eat money. And most people know that, but if Christians aren't more explicit in that, I would just love to see more of that advocacy, for a future where we do really put people first, and that starts in our local church context. So yeah, I'll probably just whiz through these. Oh, I spoke and prayed with Catherine Hayhoe, who's the author of Saving Us. And again, she is just such an inspirational woman. And yeah, she was really vulnerable to us in our prayers. And she's a leading climate scientist. And yeah, we just prayed with her. It was incredible. And she's great if you don't already know her work. And yeah, this is a group of other Christians from around the world who are involved in A Rocha, and yeah, Tear Fund and the Lausanne Creation Care Network. So I felt very encouraged that yeah, they were there as well. And just to actually finish up, we sung The Blessing over the conference centre on the last day, which was just so special. I was weeping once we started crying. And I just thought that post-it note that was at one of the other stalls really reflected that so well. What's happening to our planet now is nothing but a reflection of our humanity that we lost. Please stop. And I thought that was quite a critical note, but I thought actually this ultimately is about us and our nature and our intrinsic actions and our character. And if we believe in a God of justice and a God of peace and a God of hope, then that's actually the solution to regaining our humanity, whatever that means. So yeah, it was really, really powerful to sing The Blessing there. Yeah, just to actually bless people. We want a world that blesses people, and climate change totally undermines those efforts. So yeah, anyway, I will finish up there. Sorry, that was so much info, but it would just be great to, I know we only have 10-15 minutes left, but maybe just if anyone has any questions or thoughts, we could chat about that, and then just finish up with some reflections and prayer. But yeah, thank you so much for listening. Over to you, Ben, or if anyone has any questions, do you want to hop in?
Yeah, any sort of feedback, anything you'd like to share, any observations?
So Lydia, sounds like an amazing experience. I'm just curious, because obviously the experience for you was probably not what you expected when you went there. It was quite a shock. So what would you say it's changed you in any way in terms of your perspective? And are you doing anything different, or what's your focus from that? How has that helped you focus in on what your role is and what you might suggest we do as well?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. That's a really, really good question. I think, like I said initially, I was very angry and skeptical at the conference, and I think I've been surprised that those emotions have stayed with me now, and I'm still very skeptical of basically what anyone says, which maybe is, I'm not sure how God-given that is. I think righteous anger is great, but maybe that's just a personality thing that I need to work on. Like, I'm just very skeptical, and I'm normally quite a positive, trusting person. So I think that's really affected my work, that, you know, like, what are we actually aiming for and why? And if your motivation, I don't know, I think it's just really made me think that my motivation for this is a belief in a God who made a creation that is so connected and intertwined and in balance and harmony. And I think it's really important to think, even in church work and local work, like, why are you doing this? Like, and I'm keen to learn what people's why is, but I think it really has heightened my sort of like purpose in this, maybe. And I think practically, yeah, when I now like speak to churches and friends, they tell me, they're like, oh, I saw this thing on the news, you know, and it told me, I don't know, like, I can't think of an example, but it told me this news. I'm then like, oh, did you hear that from anywhere else? Or what do you think about that? And just to like ask those second questions. So I suppose in a relational way, it's made me a bit more like, okay, you're saying that, but like, yeah, tell me more, rather than taking what other people tell me face value. And I think for you guys, well, it's also just really encouraged me to pray about it. It's so easy to say, oh, pray about the climate, but when do I actually do that? So now I've just started going on longer walks and like not taking my phone and just being like, okay, this is my time in nature. God's the creator of nature, so let's spend this time praying and interceding for the climate crisis, whatever facet of that I want to focus on, I do. But it's really made me like, actually, if your hope and need for all this work is in God, then you need to focus on him rather than all the emails and the data. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, sort of, if there's any help, we had G7 here in Carbis Bay, and I had similar thoughts of what a waste. And it's actually, it does make you reflect that it's going to be down to the individuals and the small people to make the change. The big people, they do respond, but they like show and connection and things that have influence and benefit to them. And we have got to do our part and get on with it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I may just say, a huge advocate of leaving your phone behind for great chunks of time. I never take my phone to church with me because it's not a place to do business, it's a place to worship. And but actually, just again reflecting on what you've both said there, the small actions. If we came full circle back to what George was sharing about the work with Derek Thomas, it's countless conversations and just that gathering of numbers of people until actually people are encouraged over the tipping point where they realise just how important this work is. So keep going with that. Maggie, I saw a hand going up.
Yeah, any more questions?
Well, thank you, Lydia, for sharing that with us. It's wonderful to hear your enthusiasm, your opening your mind to what you were seeing and experiencing, and then sharing it. And that is, unique. You'll never have that again. And I think that's just so lovely. Well done, you. But I think and you will have learnt you obviously have learnt so much from it. And you're going to take it out into the world now, and whatever you're doing with your praying or whatever, it's lovely. But one thing that I found a bit depressing, because I must have been giving money through Southwest Water bills for so many years to the water crisis, because it comes out automatically, doesn't it? And it's doing no good, seemingly doing no good at all. If it's just really concerning, isn't it? The water, that so many people are still without water.
Yeah, sorry, that wasn't meant to like undermine any of that.
Oh, no, not at all. But it's just true, isn't it? I mean, it's there.
And I think for me, seeing that, I was like, I'm seeing all these brand logos and it looks and sounds great. And then I looked down at my phone, I was like, 1 in 3 people still don't have access to safe water. Like, there was just such a clear disparity, and I don't have the solutions to that, and that's a whole massive systemic issue. But yeah, it is really depressing and just so not fair, like at any level. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Anne. Hi.
Hi, have I? Oh yeah, I have unmuted. Yeah, just an observation and a question, really. I mean, yes, in lots of ways, I found it. I mean, it's fantastic. Thank you. Your enthusiasm and passion really shone through. But it is just that whole depressing, all the spin. I was just thinking of Greta Thunberg, you know, with her blah, blah, blah. And she wasn't going to go. And I can understand, because I imagine that's what it was like at Glasgow as well. And so, and the fact that they weren't recycling, and you know, Coca-Cola was sponsoring. What hypocrisy. And it's just sort of, yeah, so that's my, yeah, it's opened my eyes an awful lot more to what happened, because I think the spin that they were putting on generally, and the government do, makes it sound an awful lot better than he was. Just a question you might not be able to answer. I was just, I sort of pricked up my ears when you were talking about the fossil fuel treaty. And it made me think, what happened? Have we signed up to a fossil fuel treaty? Why are we investigating opening coal mines in Cumbria, and the government's still talking about fracking and North Sea oil, North Sea gas? Where are we at? Does anybody know? Well,
does anyone want to chip in?
In an energy crisis, basically, put it shortly, and we need to resolve that. That could be a negative impact on the planet, but the current crisis has really thrown a curveball at governments, I think.
Yeah, we've heard said that quite a lot of the suggestion about reopening of things is in part a confidence-inspiring activity for the UK nation. Not all of those things are likely or viable to happen, but there's quite a lot of fodder being thrown in to try and encourage us that everything's going to be okay.
Have we signed this treaty?
No, the UK government hasn't. And I just wanted to say that, yeah, all this COP and G7 work and all these conferences, basically none of the policies there are actually binding. So all of this work towards net zero by 2030, by like, you know, carbon neutral 2050 is all based on the goodwill of governments, which, to be quite frank, I just don't believe in. And I think that's a big problem, because actually the only thing that would stop like the UK from expanding these places is ultimately economic interests and a very big moral shift. And I don't think either are that likely, because these goals and science targets set out in like the Paris Agreement and the Kyoto Protocol, it's all essentially voluntary and non-binding, which I think is the big problem actually. But yeah, sorry, I can't give more info. I can send a link to the treaty though, so you can have a look at that. But George, do you want to hop in?
Yeah, thanks very much, Lydia. That was great. That was great. That was a kind of unique insight on a day-to-day basis, which we just don't get. So thank you so much for that. I think for me, there's two basic reactions. Either we feel really despondent and therefore what's the point? And the other one is we feel really despondent and say, right, if they're not doing it, we continue to do it. There's more reason for us to get involved in all this. Whether that's working as individual, behaving as individual Christians, or contacting MPs, or whatever it is, or working with local communities. Because God expects us to do it. It's one of the things that we're, I would argue, expected to do, to look after his creation. So thank you very much. That was really
Thank you.
helpful.
No, thank you. And I know that was all a lot of information, and it can be really, I obviously experienced it and lived it, but I'm aware that I've just given you so much. So please do take time to just like reflect on that and pray about it, because yeah, I'm aware that's a lot for you to hear. But yeah, I think it's really given me just insight. Like, this is just one example of how fallen our world is, which is so sad, but actually is so true. And it's really made me sort of, in a spiritual way, I suppose, like bring all that to the cross and to Jesus and just like lay that burden down, because I'm not the solution and it's not all on me, and I'm not the savior at the end of the day. So yeah.
Fabulous. Lydia, thank you for sharing just so clearly from your heart and from the things that matter to you at a deep and faithful level, what your experience of COP was like. You know, it's really easy to look at all of this stuff and go, well, we're stuffed, aren't we? You know, you know, we're stuffed. And I just want to keep coming back to the fact that actually there is still time to make change. While some moments have passed, like 1.2 degrees of frozen sea ice, you know, things have passed, but that doesn't mean they're not reclaimable again. It doesn't mean that they're not resurrectable. But it does mean that we, both individually and corporately, have to, or have to is always so strong. I don't want to bully anyone into anything, but we have an opportunity to respond and be people who lead the way in changing hearts and minds on this. And part of that is around our work through net zero. Part of this is around our work through understanding what is it the Bible says about all of this, but it's also listening to each other and seeing what work's happening in each one of our places. And our little steps may feel very little indeed sometimes, but they are steps toward sustainable change. And if everyone took little steps towards sustainable change, we would see transformation. And that's what we have to keep urging. So it does take time, and it feels like time is against us. But I just encourage you to remain positive in this. Ultimately, as people of faith and as people who see something and understand something of the person of Jesus and a holy God, we are called into a process that is good and is joyful, and God is good. And I just say, hold on to that and remember that as people of faith. I feel that my mission is to remind people and to speak constantly that there is good in the world, and it's God who put it there. So we keep working towards this together. Now, we are running fabulously tight to time. There's a whole load of things I want to share with you, which is everyone okay for 5 minutes? If you need to go, go. But if not, there's just a whole load of resources and events coming up that I'd really like to share with you, just so we'll make sure they're on the newsletter. But the newsletter is going to be a week later than normal because Rosie needs some leave, which is wholly good and appropriate. And we bless you as you go on leave for next week, Rosie. But let me just see if I can quickly bring some things to share, which I'm still going to be able to access. Okay, so you've probably got all of my notes and everything up here. So I'm just going to first of all kick off with March the 16th. Let's see if it will open this. It will. No, it won't. Not that one either. Let me see if I can bring up this one back again. Sorry, friends, this is going to be a joyful moment. On the 16th, we have got the C of E All-Comers update. There's a monthly Diocesan Environment Officers, quarterly Diocesan Environment Officers update that takes place. But this 16th of March, 2 till 3:30, we'll make sure there's a registration link in the newsletter, but I'm aware that's next week.
I can send it out, Ben. I can send it out to people here. If you could,
that'd be great. Yeah. Let's do that. We'll send out links after this meeting. So have a look at that. It's a great opportunity to hear of everything that's going on in the Church of England from a response to climate crisis, net zero. They're really, really useful catch-up. So we'll make sure those are included. Up on the screen at the moment, what you can see is our own series of workshop, Net Zero 2030, Cut Carbon, Cut Costs. And session 2 is shortly coming up, which is on Thursday, the 23rd of March. And this is the walk and talk audit through St Andrew's Church in Redruth, looking at what could be done and how to improve the efficiency of the church. And that's kind of a two-part one, because session 3 is then actually what you can and can't actually do with church buildings, the do's and don'ts. The reality of some of our church buildings is, as historic monuments, there are certain things we can do and certain things we can't do. But there's a whole series of events here, 5 of them in all, that are on our website. Please do sign up to those. These are resources that we're providing in partnership with Transformation Cornwall, and they will be really helpful events. Let me see if I can get this one to, is it going to play? It is, great. Let me pull this down. Oh no, there we go. Tear Fund have a campaign just launching called This Is a Rubbish Campaign. And it's all about pollutants of watercourses and the effects of rubbish that's just left to rot, and the impact on the last, the lost and the least, the poor and the most impoverished. And so there's an opportunity to join and sign this petition. And so we'll make sure that's included, but I encourage you to have a look at that. Similarly, well, that's an English term, isn't it? Similarly. Anyway, there is the Fit for the Future are an organisation that we are partnered with through the Church of England, and Fit for the Future have a number of events coming up, which are training events. So there's this one coming up on sustainability strategy and series, and you can book onto that. It's on the 21st of March, and these are great training options. And there's another one in the links that we'll send you, which is how to actually communicate climate crisis and net zero in a world that doesn't seem to want to hear. So it's just some great opportunities there to do that. I'm going to stop sharing because they're going all over the place. No. Okay, sorry, I'm having a technical little moment here. None of you will know I'm the least technical person on earth. Right. And a couple of thank yous, just a great big thanks to all of you who came out to the Great Big Green Fair at the Cathedral last Saturday, which also coincided with Truro's celebration of St. Piran. So bless you for attending that. It was really great to see people. And also thanks to everyone who engaged with the Show the Love campaign, which is our beautiful green hearts, which was this great idea of sending these green hearts out as a Valentine's declaration of the things we love about our world, and urging our MPs and government to respond to them. Next time we are gathering, it's an evening gathering on Thursday, the 9th of April. And at the moment, we've just got a bit of a juggle in the agenda, but the likelihood it's going to be a sort of a more spacious opportunity to catch up with one another and to pray for one another. We just felt it'd be a really good opportunity actually to spend a bit of time praying for each other and hearing what's going on in our churches and bringing before God the things that we are struggling with, but also the things that we're rejoicing over. So that's an evening gathering on Thursday, the 9th of April, and I look forward to seeing you then. There's been huge amounts of stuff we've listened to today. Let's just take a moment of quiet and I'll draw us together in prayer. Creator God, we care desperately about this extraordinary created place you've made for us, Earth, our home. We care that it doesn't seem fair that people almost hidden from view from us are disappearing underwater. Their lands are being changed so drastically by climate change. It seems incredulous that we hold great big international gatherings at huge cost, and yet somehow we're only paying lip service to really what needs to be done. And yet, within that, we recognize you are at work. You're not blinded from the view of those things. You see it all. And you do call us to be there and witness there. Thank you for Lydia, that she was called into that place and was able to speak love to power, speak truth to power. And we ask, Father, that you would help us and empower us and guide us and enable us to be a group of people together, this network, our churches, our communities, who respond to climate crisis, to climate justice, to creation care with full hearts and with all our ability, in a belief that we are convinced that we can see transformation, that when Tewel 3 come together, when we work together, we can see change. And when we come together with you, we're confident that change can happen. So would you bless each one of us in our settings and all that we do. And I thank you for each one of these people and all the energy they give and all the commitment they give and their perseverance. And we look forward to a re-flourishing not only of our own Cornwall, but of our nation and indeed country. Amen. Oh, look at that. Am I saying that April the 9th? That's probably not the right date then, is it? It's a Sunday. What will happen is at this point is that Rosie, the source of all knowledge, will tell me the true date.
The 13th.
Thank you. Bless you. Thank you for those who spotted that. April the 13th is our next gathering. My apologies for misleading you in any way. Thanks, friends. Thank you for committing your time to this. Great to have this time of fellowship with you. And thank you to Lydia. We will see you all again soon. Every blessing.